This is an ND filter, and it's the first one that I've ever gotten, and maybe you don't have one of these because they're a couple $100 and you just don't have that to spare right now. Maybe when you were ordering your equipment, you were more of a novice, you didn't understand how important they were. Maybe this is the first time you've ever heard of an ND filter in your life. But the bottom line is, if you don't have one, you're gonna have a really hard time shooting outdoors. So here are 5 tips for shooting on bright sunny days without an ND filter.
Let's get rockin'!
It's ironic that I'm shooting this video because finally, my first ever ND filter came in the mail today, but once upon a time, 10 hours ago, I never owned one. Recently I was shooting a video and I wanted it to be really high quality because I had a pretty good feeling it was gonna end up being tweeted by the NCAA baseball account, which it was. But I ended up having to shoot the B-roll for that video the day before it had to be posted because the next day was the opening home game of that baseball season and I really wanted to get the video out before the season started. But as soon as I was ready to shoot, the sun just came blasting out, just full force. It was super annoying. The bottom line is that these situations are going to occur. You're gonna be shooting on bright sunny days. There's nothing you can do about it. So you need to have some sort of a plan in place. And if you don't have an ND filter, a lot of times what people do is just crank their shutter speed super fast. But that's gonna cause that thing that happens where there's not enough motion blur and it's super jittery and hard in the eyes, and you really don't want that. So the first thing I want to talk about are the in-camera decisions that you need to make while you're shooting. The first choice you have is the frame rate, and I would recommend shooting at the highest frame rate that you can because that's going to automatically cause your footage to be darker. What you can kind of do is plan your project around the idea that you're going to most likely be playing your B-roll back in slow motion. So if you can, go for either 60 or 120 frames per second. Next, I think in this situation, it's probably okay to set your shutter speed a little bit faster than it's supposed to be. Not a ton, but just enough to make a little bit of a difference. So set your shutter speed to double the frame rate like you normally would, and then go one stop faster. So if you're shooting 60, double that would be 125, and then just go one faster than 125. I think the increment that's closest to double 120 would be 250, at least on a Canon. So just go one faster than that. This is obviously not ideal. You want to, as often as you can, follow the 180-degree shutter rule, but considering the situation, this should help. Most importantly, you need to use shaded areas to your advantage. And if you don't do this, everything that I said before and everything I'm about to say after is not going to matter because your footage is going to be pretty much unsavable. So that baseball video that I was talking about that I said I was shooting the B-roll for, take a look at this frame where I didn't have the subject in the shadows. No amount of editing is going to really be able to save this. Look, when I bring the whites up, his face blows out almost as quickly as the background does, and that's because his face is near the same exposure level as the background, which makes sense because the sun is hitting his face the same way it's hitting the background. You can try a lot of things here, and no matter what, this isn't gonna look very good. Honestly, this isn't as bad as I remember it being, but yeah, I mean, he just looks like Casper the Ghost. Now let's take a look at a shot that I took about 3 minutes earlier, but this time he was in the shade. Yes, the background still has parts that are super blown out, like right around here, but because he's in the shadows, there's still details in the face. And remember with this last shot, when I pulled the whites up, his face was blowing out almost at the same time as the background? Look at this. It's not doing that nearly as badly because there's still detail in his face that is much more separate from the whites in the background. Right off the bat, I can tell this is a much more usable shot, and we're gonna get into some color correcting in a little bit. Alright, so now that we've gotten past what to do with your camera, let's get into what you can do in editing. And just full disclosure, the sky is going to be blown out. If you're shooting on a sunny day and you don't have an ND filter, you're not going to get any detail in the sky. Probably the best choice would be to color correct for your subject's face and then just decide how white you want to let your sky be. You could bring it down to 90 or 85, that's kind of what I tend to do, but it's kind of to taste. Let's go ahead and jump in here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I were to try and make this look as good as it could be, or at least to my eyes, probably bring that around there, the shadows down a little bit. This is what I was talking about, how the whites are normally, if we hadn't done anything, they would be up at 100. We kind of want to decide where we want to let them sit so that this area is not pure white, and you need to decide what you're okay with. Like obviously coming down to here, that just looks weird. That's obviously gray. People are gonna be like, okay, why is the sky gray? But if you get up into the high 80s, 90s, it looks close enough to white that people won't really question it. But it's nice that you can bring those whites down because it gets some of these super bright areas to come down as well. So I would probably bring the whites right around here so that the The whites are sitting somewhere between 90 and 80. And after that, just crush the blacks a little bit. All right, I think that's where I like it best. There's one last finishing touch that you can do that will help up the quality of your footage a little bit, and I have to give a shout out to Aiden Robbins. He made a video on this topic that I'm about to talk about in a second here. I saw that video about 48 hours before I started editing the baseball video, so it was really just perfect timing because it does help a lot. I'm gonna show you here in a second, and I was just really glad that I was able to see that right before I edited that video. So shout out to Aiden Robbins for that, thanks man. So what you're gonna wanna do is first duplicate the layer, turn the bottom layer off. Come over to the effects panel, type in Luma key. Bring Luma key onto the top layer. What you're gonna wanna do is bring the cutoff so that it only shows you the really, really, really bright areas, like the areas that are actually almost in perfect white. I feel like for some reason 75 works a lot. We're gonna go ahead and stick with that. Then what you wanna do is turn this back on. Now, here's where the magic happens. Now that you've keyed out only the bright areas, what we can do is blur those bright areas. I usually do it around, I think 10 should be fine. What that does is it creates a nice smooth transition between the areas that are super bright and the areas that are exposed correctly. It's much better for people to think that you wanted it to be super bright and dreamy than them thinking, oh, well, he just set his camera the wrong way. I've actually had people come up to me and say that they really enjoyed these shots, which is pretty hilarious because I was super worried about them the whole time in editing. It makes it much more just easier on the eyes. I think that's the worst part about overexposed footage is just those harsh lines between the super bright areas and the areas that are exposed correctly. But if you can do this, boom, get a nice soft transition between it, it just looks much more aesthetically pleasing. If you can, just get your hands on one of these. It's gonna help you a lot. This is a variable one, so I can have a bunch of different settings. You don't have to, try and prove to yourself that you can make it work without one. If you have this gear, put it to use. But if you're like me and if you waited 2 or 3 years too long to get one, then you should probably follow these 5 tips because they're gonna help you a lot. They always say these are like sunglasses for your lens. It's like totally true. If you put this over your face, it's like actually looks like sunglasses. It must really just be the same thing, except it just has threads that can screw onto your lens. I wanna see what it looks like when I do the variable thing. Yeah, it definitely gets darker and brighter. These things are amazing. You should probably just get one, but if you don't have one, follow the 5 tips that I just said because they're gonna help you. And if you agree, consider liking the video, maybe even subscribing. I don't know. I hope it helped though, but see you guys in the next one. Boom, bum, bum.